The War Council chamber of the Zorvith Dominion reeked of scorched metal and fear. The doors slid open with a hiss, and a battered figure stumbled inside, his exoskeletal armor cracked, his breathing ragged. Commander Vyrkal rose from his throne-like seat, crimson eyes narrowing at the pitiful sight before him. The figure, a Zorvith scout captain, collapsed to his knees, his mandibles twitching as he struggled to speak. "We thought them weak, but the humans, they are unlike any we've ever faced." The silence that followed was heavy. Behind Vyrkal, the high-ranking officers of the Dominion shifted uneasily, their usual arrogance tempered by the raw terror in the scout captain's voice. "Explain," Vyrkal commanded. The scout coughed, dark ichor dripping from his mandibles. His voice was hoarse, trembling. "We invaded their colonies as planned. Their defenses were primitive. We overwhelmed them in hours. But then..." He shuddered. "Then the killing began." A murmur rippled through the chamber. The Zorvith had conquered countless worlds, subjugated dozens of species. Resistance was expected. But this sounded different. "They do not fight like the others," the scout continued. "We took their cities. Their armies crumbled. But instead of surrendering, they disappeared into the shadows. They strike from nowhere. They set traps, devastating, cruel traps that we do not detect until it is too late. They poison our food. They jam our communications. They turn our own weapons against us." Vyrkal clenched his fists. "This is nothing more than primitive defiance. They will break, as all others have." The scout's gaze lifted, hollow and haunted. "That's what I thought, until I saw what they did to Admiral Krell's fleet." A sharp intake of breath came from Counselor Xiphos, the oldest member of the council. The room fell deathly still. Admiral Krell's fleet was annihilated. Vyrkal's voice was dangerously low. The scout gave a slow, pained nod. "Not in battle. They were lured. A distress signal from a captured colony. When they arrived, the humans let them land without resistance. The Admiral assumed it was a surrender. He swallowed. But it was a trap. They detonated their own city. A nuclear blast, self-inflicted. They destroyed themselves just to take us with them." Xiphos exhaled sharply, his claws tightening around his staff. "Madness." "No," the scout whispered. "It was calculated. Every step of this war, they have adapted. We take ground, and they make it uninhabitable. We break their bodies, and they come back stronger. They have no honor, no sense of survival. They will fight until there is nothing left." A deep unease settled over the War Council. Vyrkal's jaw tightened. "You cower before an inferior race? Inferior?" The scout let out a broken laugh. "Then tell me, Commander, why do the dead outnumber the living?" Vyrkal's claws dug into the armrests of his chair. He turned his gaze to Xiphos. "You are our historian. What do the records say?" Xiphos hesitated, then stepped forward. His voice was measured but grim. "We have seen this before. Long ago, the Draconair Empire waged war on an insignificant world called Earth. The war lasted less than a century. The Draconair were erased from existence." Murmurs of disbelief spread through the room. "A coincidence," Vyrkal scoffed. "No," Xiphos said. "It has happened more than once. The Varlos, the Tirzan, all once mighty empires. All engaged humanity. None exist today. The records are fragmented, but the warnings remain consistent." His voice lowered. "Never provoke humanity. Never back them into a corner. And above all, never let them wage total war." A heavy silence followed. Vyrkal exhaled sharply. "Superstition. We are stronger. More advanced. We will crush them." The scout captain's breath hitched. "You still don't understand." He lifted his arm, revealing a data pad covered in human transmissions. He tapped a trembling claw against the screen. They have a message for you. A distorted voice crackled through the speakers. A human voice, calm, steady, chilling. You have taken our homes. Killed our people. You think you've won. A pause. Then, with quiet menace, you haven't seen what we do when we're losing. Static. Then silence. The scout shuddered. Commander. I beg you. End this war. Before they end us. Vyarkal stood, his crimson eyes burning. No. We will show them what true war is. Xiphos closed his eyes, his mandibles tightening. Then may the Ancient Ones have mercy on us. The ruins of Epsilon Prime stretched for miles, a graveyard of steel and fire. Once a thriving human colony, now it was nothing but smoldering rubble, its skyline reduced to skeletal remains. The Zorvith fleet hovered above like carrion birds, their landing craft descending in waves. Commander Vyarkal stood at the edge of a shattered boulevard, the acrid stench of burnt flesh hanging thick in the air. His officers flanked him, their expressions taut. The city was theirs, what little remained of it. The humans had been broken. Or so they thought. Sir, the enemy forces have retreated to the lower levels. The tunnels beneath the city are extensive. We are hunting them down now, reported a Zorvith lieutenant, his armor scuffed from battle. Vyarkal exhaled sharply. They will not run forever. Starve them out. Seal every exit, flood them with gas if you must. This ends today. A flicker of hesitation crossed the lieutenant's face. With respect, Commander, we have tried. Every time we think we have them contained, they disappear. Our patrols are ambushed. Our sentries go missing. They know these ruins better than we do. Vyarkal clenched his jaw. Then burn them out. This planet is ours. I want nothing left of their resistance. The lieutenant saluted stiffly and turned, issuing commands into his communicator. From the shadows of a collapsed building, Captain Elias Carter watched through the cracked visor of his helmet. He pressed a gloved hand to his earpiece. They're committing more forces to the lower levels. Looks like they think they've got us cornered. A low chuckle crackled over the comms. Let them think that, replied Sergeant Alvarez, his voice steady despite the hellscape surrounding them. Carter shifted his position, his muscles coiled with tension. The Zorvith had overwhelmed their defenses, taken their cities, and massacred civilians. But Earth's forces hadn't shattered, they had adapted. We hit them at the supply routes first, Carter murmured. No food, no munitions, no reinforcements. Cut them off, and they start making mistakes. Copy that, came the voice of Corporal Singh. Explosives are in place. We're waiting on your go. Carter exhaled, his breath fogging the inside of his helmet. They were outnumbered, outgunned, and exhausted. But the Zorvith had underestimated the resilience of humanity. Detonate, he ordered. A heartbeat later, the ground rumbled as fire erupted across the skyline. Zorvith war machines, once stationed near supply caches, were reduced to molten wreckage. Secondary blasts ignited fuel reserves, sending pillars of black smoke into the already scarred sky. Panic rippled through the enemy ranks. Vyarkal's communicator crackled with desperate voices. Commander. We're under attack. A deafening explosion cut the transmission short. Vyarkal's mandibles clicked in frustration. Where are they striking from? Everywhere, came the grim response. From the ruins, human forces emerged like ghosts. Silent, swift, relentless. They struck from the shadows, their weapons precise. Zorvith soldiers fell before they even had time to react. Carter led the charge, rifle in hand. He fired a burst into a squad of aliens before diving behind cover, reloading in a fluid motion. Push forward. Hit them while they're reeling. Sergeant Alvarez cut through the chaos, planting charges on the remaining Zorvith artillery. 5 seconds. Carter sprinted through the crumbling streets, his breath coming in short gasps. A stray plasma bolt sizzled past his shoulder, singing the edge of his armor. he ignored it. He had one objective: cripple the invaders, make them fear every step they took. The countdown hit 0. Explosions ripped through the enemy's heavy artillery, sending shockwaves that flattened anything in their radius. The battlefield lit up in violent orange hues, casting monstrous shadows against the ruins. Hfysci-fi watched in stunned silence. This wasn't a battle. It was an unraveling. The humans fought without regard for their own survival, their every move designed to inflict maximum damage. They were not warriors in the traditional sense. They were something else, something the Dominion had never encountered. They were survivors. And survivors didn't fight fair. A voice crackled over Carter's comms. Incoming transmission from the Zorvith fleet. They're pulling back. For the first time since the invasion began, Carter smiled. It wasn't a smile of victory. It was the smile of a man who knew the war was far from over, but had just won the first real battle. He raised his rifle, eyes cold. Let them run. They'll come back. And next time, humanity would be waiting. The war should have been over. The Zorvith had taken the colonies, crushed human defenses, and established dominance. But instead of surrender, they had found themselves dragged into a conflict unlike any they had ever fought. Commander Hfysci-fi paced inside the Dominion's war chamber aboard the battleship Vraxis Prime, his claws tapping against the steel floor. The recent retreat from Epsilon Prime had been a humiliation, but he refused to accept it as a defeat. The humans had merely delayed the inevitable. A holographic display flickered before him, showing battle maps riddled with inconsistencies. Supply convoys missing. Communication nodes jammed. Entire regiments going dark without a single distress signal. They are dismantling us, Counselor Xiphos murmured from the shadows, his tone grim. Hfysci-fi turned sharply. You speak as if the war is lost. The Dominion does not lose. Xiphos stepped forward, his expression unreadable. Neither did the Draken AR. Until they did. Hfysci-fi's mandibles twitched in irritation. Enough with the history lessons. Then let me speak of the present, Xiphos continued. Our fleets are stretched thin. We have superior firepower, yet we cannot win because the humans refuse to fight our kind of war. They don't engage in honorable combat. They fight from the shadows, striking where we are weakest. This is not a conventional war. It is extermination. Hfysci-fi scoffed. Then we will exterminate them first. The chamber fell silent as an officer rushed in, his crest flattened in distress. Commander, we've intercepted a human transmission. Hfysci-fi motioned for him to proceed. The officer hesitated before playing the message. The human voice that followed was calm, measured. You've taken our cities, our homes, our people. You think you've won. But you don't understand what you've done. A pause. You should have left us in peace. You should have listened to the warnings. Now, we have nothing left to lose. The transmission ended. Hfysci-fi felt a coldness settle over him. A species with nothing left to lose was the most dangerous kind. The ambush. Captain Elias Carter crouched atop a ruined observation deck, peering through the scope of his rifle. Below, the Zorvith forces moved with mechanical efficiency, their patrols sweeping the wreckage for survivors. They had grown more cautious, more aware of human tactics, but not aware enough. Targets in sight, he whispered into his comm. Sergeant Alvarez's voice crackled in response. Copy. All teams in position. Awaiting your command. Carter took a slow breath, steadying his pulse. They had spent weeks setting this up. Letting the Zorvith believe they were retreating, scattering to the winds. In reality, they had drawn them into a kill box. Execute. Explosions ripped through the enemy's formations. Buildings they thought abandoned erupted into flames, sending debris and bodies flying. A dozen Zorvith soldiers crumpled before they had time to react. Then the gunfire started. Carter squeezed the trigger, a plasma round punching through the skull of a Zorvith officer. His squad followed suit, cutting down the confused enemy ranks before they could regroup. From the alleyways, human fighters emerged like specters, knives flashing in the dim light. Some Zorvith tried to retreat, but the roads had been mined. The ones who ran were swallowed by fire and steel. The ambush was precise. Ruthless. Absolute. Carter moved through the battlefield like a ghost, rifle in one hand, knife in the other. He drove the blade into a Zorvith's throat before pivoting to fire at another. They had trained for this, not for glory, not for honor, but for survival. A transmission crackled over the Zorvith's emergency frequency. "We are overrun. Requesting evac." "There." Silence. Vyrkal, watching from orbit, clenched his fists. He had seen battles lost before, but never like this. Never with such cold efficiency. "Enough," he growled. "Deploy the bioweapon." A new horror. Carter crouched behind a scorched transport, wiping blood from his visor. The battle had gone as planned. Another Zorvith force crushed. Another message sent. Then his comm lit up with a distress call. "This is Recon Team Bravo, we have incoming." Not ground forces, something else. A cold dread seeped into Carter's bones. "Clarify," he ordered. Static. Then a voice, barely above a whisper. "They're burning everything." Above, the sky turned an unnatural shade of green. A fine mist began to descend, covering the ruins like a ghostly veil. Carter's gut twisted. He had seen enough wars to recognize what was happening. Chemical warfare. "Masks on," he barked, slamming his helmet's respirator into place. A second later, screams filled the air. The mist rolled through the streets, curling around bodies, dissolving flesh from bone. The Zorvith weren't just trying to kill them anymore. They were erasing them. Alvarez coughed violently over the comm. "They're gassing the entire sector. We have to move, now." Carter scanned the battlefield. His squad was scattered. Some hadn't gotten their masks on in time. He watched in horror as their bodies convulsed, their skin blistering before they collapsed. His grip tightened around his rifle. They want to play dirty? Fine. But they're about to learn something. He turned to Alvarez, his voice ice cold. "Call it in. Project Ragnarok is a go." The sky above Epsilon Prime burned green, a sickly, unnatural glow as the Zorvith's bioweapon consumed everything in its path. Buildings stood silent as tombstones, their interiors filled with the echoes of the dying. The mist clung to the ruins, dissolving flesh, corroding metal, leaving behind only husks of what had once been. But even as the Zorvith's chemical attack swept across the battlefield, humanity did not break. Captain Elias Carter sprinted through the skeletal remains of a collapsed skyscraper, his breath sharp behind his mask. Around him, his surviving squad members moved with ruthless precision, navigating the poison wasteland like wraiths. They had fought in hell before, this was just another version of it. "Status," he barked into his comm. Alvarez's voice came through, strained but steady. "We lost Singh and Martinez. The others are holding at Rally Point Echo. The bastards deployed this toxin across the entire sector, civilians, friendlies, their own troops, they don't care." Carter's jaw tightened. He had known the Zorvith were brutal, but this was desperation. They were losing, and now they wanted to take everything down with them. "Understood," he said. "Are we green for Ragnarok?" A pause. Then Alvarez replied, "Affirmative. Command has authorized full deployment." Carter exhaled slowly. Project Ragnarok had always been a contingency, a response to an enemy too monstrous to face conventionally. The Zorvith had made their choice. Now, they would learn what it meant to push humanity past the brink. Execute. The wrath of humanity. High above Epsilon Prime, the human fleet moved. Silent. Unforgiving. The Dominion's warships, still hovering in the upper atmosphere, detected the incoming signatures too late. A cluster of long-dormant satellites, once dismissed as useless relics, flickered to life. They had been there since the first days of the invasion, hidden, forgotten, waiting. Then they fired. Orbital bombardments rained down with surgical precision. The first wave targeted Zorvith command centers, obliterating them in streaks of molten plasma. The second wave struck supply caches, fuel depots, and communication hubs, severing the Dominion's grip on the war front. And the third? The third was for vengeance. The fall of the Zorvith. Vyarkal watched from the bridge of Vraxis Prime, his crimson eyes wide with disbelief. They were waiting for us. It was not spoken as an observation. It was a realization, one that came too late. The humans had known. They had anticipated the Dominion's every move, endured every hardship, and adapted in ways the Zorvith could not comprehend. They had never been fighting to win a battle. They had been fighting to end the war. His officers scrambled, calling for evasive maneuvers, for shields to be raised, for countermeasures to be deployed. None of it mattered. The human assault was not wild, not reckless. It was calculated, methodical. Each strike dismantled a crucial piece of the Dominion's war machine. The fleet was unraveling before his eyes. A transmission interrupted the chaos. A human face appeared on the main display, scarred, unyielding, eyes burning with quiet fury. Commander Vyarkal, Captain Carter greeted, his voice devoid of emotion. I want you to understand something. Vyarkal said nothing. He could only listen. We could have been allies. We could have shared knowledge, built something greater. But you chose war. You chose to burn our worlds, slaughter our people. And now you want to wipe us out, as if we are nothing. Carter's gaze darkened. But we are not nothing. We are humanity. And we do not forget. A final command flashed across the human fleet's systems. Execute total retaliation. From orbit, the sky ignited. Aftermath. Hours later, the once mighty Zorvith Dominion was silent. What remained of their forces had fled, abandoning Epsilon Prime and the war entirely. Their fleet, crippled beyond repair, limped back to their homeworlds, knowing that they had provoked something they could never again challenge. Humanity did not pursue. They did not need to. The message had been delivered, etched into the stars themselves. On the surface, Carter stood amid the wreckage, his rifle slung over his back. The air was thick with smoke and the scent of charred metal. Alvarez approached, his expression weary. They're gone. Carter nodded. And the survivors? Alvarez hesitated. Some of their wounded surrendered. What's left of their command structure is asking for terms. Carter exhaled, staring out at the broken city. Humanity had won, but at what cost? The ruins of Epsilon Prime would stand as a reminder of what had been lost, and what they had been forced to become. Treat the prisoners, he said finally. We're not monsters. Alvarez smirked faintly. Could have fooled me. Carter gave a tired chuckle, but there was no humor in it. We warned them, he murmured. They didn't listen. He turned his gaze skyward, where the last Zorvith ships vanished into the void. Now, they will never forget.